Juliet Summers clutched her worn leather portfolio against her chest as she stepped into the gleaming marble lobby of Blackwell Enterprises. The building stretched toward the Seattle sky like a monument to success, its glass facade reflecting the gray morning clouds that seemed permanently settled over the city. She'd practiced her interview answers a dozen times in the mirror of her studio apartment, but nothing had prepared her for this level of corporate intimidation. The receptionist, a woman with platinum hair and a smile that never reached her, eyes directed her to the top floor. "Mr. Blackwell will see you in his office," she said, her tone suggesting that this was both an honor and a potential death sentence. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt like ascending to another world. When the doors opened, Juliet found herself facing floor-toozling windows that offered a breathtaking view of Elliott Bay. The office was a study in expensive minimalism, sleek furniture, abstract art that probably cost more than her annual salary, in an atmosphere of absolute power. Thomas Blackwell sat behind a mahogany desk that could have doubled as a small aircraft carrier. At 32, he possessed the kind of devastating good looks that graced magazine covers regularly. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his charcoal suit fitted with precision, and his blue eyes held the calculating coldness of a predator sizing up its prey. "Miss Summers," he said, without looking up from his computer screen, "I trust you found the building easily enough." "Yes, sir." "Thank you for considering me for the receptionist position." Now he looked at her, and Juliet felt exposed under his scrutiny. His gaze traveled from her carefully styled brown hair to her discount department store dress, taking inventory of every imperfection. Receptionist position. Thomas leaned back in his chair, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. I have a different proposition for you." Juliet's stomach dropped. "I'm sorry. Please sit down." He gestured to the chair across from his desk, and she perched on the edge, her portfolio still clutched defensively. Thomas opened a tablet and slid it across the polished surface. The screen displayed a series of photos, a stunning redhead, with emerald eyes, draped in designer gowns, and surrounded by luxury at various high society events. "This is Isabella Ashworth," Thomas said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "Supermodel, socialite, and the woman who ended our relationship 6 months ago with some rather harsh words about my character." Juliet stared at the images, feeling increasingly confused and out of place. "I don't understand what this has to do with me." Isabella claimed I was emotionally unavailable and incapable of genuine love. She said I treated relationships like business transactions. Thomas's fingers drummed against the desk. She was wrong, of course, but perception has a way of becoming reality in our circles. "Mr. Blackwell, I really think there's been some mistake, no mistake." He pulled the tablet back and fixed her with that unsettling stare. "I need to prove to Isabella that she was wrong about me. I need her to see that I'm capable of caring for someone genuinely, selflessly. And you, Miss Summers, are going to help me do exactly that." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Juliet felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I don't understand. You're going to pretend to be my girlfriend. For 6 months, you'll play the role of the woman who changed Thomas Blackwell's heart. You'll be authentic, genuine, everything Isabella claimed I could never appreciate." His smile was sharp as winter steel. "And when she realizes what she gave up, she'd come back." Juliet shot to her feet, her portfolio tumbling to the floor. "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. I came here for a job interview, not to be part of some twisted game. Sit down, Miss Summers." Thomas's voice carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "You haven't heard my offer yet. I don't want to hear it. Your brother Daniel needs surgery." The words hit Juliet like a physical blow. She sank back into the chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. "How do you know about Danny?" Thomas opened a manila folder with theatrical precision. "Spinal surgery to correct a degenerative condition. Cost, approximately $300,000. Your insurance was canceled last month due to non-payment. Medical. Debt collectors have already started calling." Each word was a dagger to her pride. Juliet felt tears prick her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "You investigated me. I make it my business to know who I'm dealing with. 25 years old, works nights, cleaning office buildings, weekends at Pike Place Market selling flowers. Graduated magna cum laude with a degree in education, but gave up teaching to care for your disabled brother. His tone was clinically detached. You're exactly what I need. What's that supposed to mean? You're authentic? Real? The kind of woman who would genuinely change a man like me? Isabella will take one look at you and believe that I've found my redemption. Juliet's hands clenched in her lap. You want me to pretend to be your girlfriend because I'm ordinary enough to be believable? I want you to pretend to be my girlfriend because you're everything she thinks I could never value. And in return, I'll pay for Danny's surgery and give you enough money to start whatever life you've been dreaming of. The office fell silent except for the distant hum of traffic far below. Juliet thought of Danny, barely 19, and trying so hard to hide his pain. She thought of their tiny apartment, the stack of medical bills on their kitchen table, the way hope had been slowly dying in her brother's eyes. How much, she whispered. $500,000. Plus all medical expenses for Danny during our arrangement. The number took her breath away. It was more money than she'd ever imagined having. Enough to save Danny, to go back to school, to reclaim the dreams she'd buried under years of survival. And if I refuse? Thomas's smile was predatory. Then you walk out of here and continue watching your brother suffer while you work 3 jobs and still can't afford to save him. Choice is yours, Miss Summers, but I'd suggest you choose quickly. Isabella is getting married next month and time is running out. Juliet closed her eyes, seeing Danny's face from that morning. He'd been joking about being her favorite burden while she helped him into his wheelchair. But she'd seen the pain he was trying to hide. If I agreed, she said, hating herself for even considering it, what would this arrangement entail? Complete transformation. New wardrobe, new appearance, etiquette training. You'll attend social events with me, convince everyone that Thomas Blackwell is madly in love. And most importantly, you'll help me prove to Isabella that she made the biggest mistake of her life. The contract he slid across the desk was thick with legal language. But one clause stood out. Should the party of the second part develop any romantic feelings during the arrangement, the contract becomes null and void. Juliet looked up at Thomas, this devastatingly handsome man who saw her as nothing more than a tool in his scheme. You're afraid I'll fall for you? I'm afraid you'll forget this is business, he replied coolly. The moment you start believing your own performance, you become a liability. She stared at the signature line, her hand trembling as she held the pen. In signing this contract, she would be agreeing to lose herself completely, to become someone else for 6 months while playing a part in Thomas Blackwell's twisted game of love and revenge. But Danny's surgery hung in the balance. His future, his hope. One condition, she said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. Danny's surgery gets scheduled immediately. Payment up front to the hospital, non-refundable, regardless of how this ends. Thomas raised an eyebrow, making demands now. Protecting my brother. You've made it clear this is a business transaction. I want my terms in writing. For a moment, something that might have been respect flickered in his eyes. Fine, Harrison, he called to his assistant through the intercom. Add an addendum to the contract. Full payment for the brother's medical expenses, transferred immediately upon signing. As Juliet signed her name with a flourish, she felt as though she was signing away her soul. The moment the ink dried, Thomas's expression shifted into something that resembled satisfaction. Welcome to my world, Juliet, he said, her name on his lips sounding like both a promise and a threat. Hey, try not to drown. The transformation began immediately, within an hour of signing the contract. Juliet found herself whisked away to an exclusive salon in downtown Seattle, where a team of stylists descended upon her like vultures. Her shoulder-length brown hair was extended, highlighted, and styled into cascading waves that framed her face in a way that made her almost unrecognizable. The makeup artist worked with surgical precision, contouring and highlighting until Juliet's reflection showed a woman she barely knew. Much better, Thomas said when she emerged from the salon 6 hours later. He was leaning against a black Tesla, checking his phone with characteristic impatience. Though we still have work to do. The next stop was a boutique on Fifth Avenue, where the prices didn't have tags. And the sales associates, whispered in reverent tones about designers Juliet had only heard of in magazines. Thomas sat in a leather chair like a king holding court, approving or dismissing outfits with a simple nod or shake of his head. "The navy Valentino," he said, when she emerged in a midnight blue dress that hugged her curves in ways that made her blush. "Perfect for tonight. Tonight." Juliet's voice came out higher than intended. "Isabella's engagement party at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel. Our public debut." The words hit her like cold water. "You want me to meet her tonight?" "I'm not ready. I don't know how to act around people like that." Thomas stood, closing the distance between them with predatory grace. "You'll learn quickly. Isabella needs to see us together, needs to start questioning her choices. Every day we wait is another day she falls deeper in love with her fiancé. What if I mess up? What if she doesn't believe we're really together? Then Danny doesn't get his surgery?" Thomas's voice was matter of fact, but the threat was clear. "Failure isn't an option, Juliet. You'll convince her or you'll lose everything." The penthouse suite at the Fairmont was a palace of marble and gold, with panoramic views of the city she'd never seen from such heights. Juliet stood at the window, still wearing the navy dress, watching the lights twinkle below like earthbound stars. The woman in the reflection seemed like a stranger, polished, elegant, someone who belonged in this world of wealth and power. Having second thoughts, Thomas appeared behind her, his reflection joining hers in the glass. He'd changed into a perfectly tailored tuxedo that made him look like he'd stepped off a magazine cover. "I keep thinking about Danny," she admitted. "He was so excited when I told him about the surgery. He actually cried, Thomas. I haven't seen him cry since our parents died." Something flickered across Thomas's face, too quick to identify. "You're doing the right thing. Am I just selling myself to the highest bidder? You're saving your brother's life. Everything else is just details." They arrived at the engagement party fashionably late, making an entrance that commanded attention. The grand ballroom was a wonderland of crystal and gold, filled with Seattle's elite sipping champagne and trading secrets. Juliet felt every eye turn toward them as they descended the marble staircase, Thomas's hand possessive on her waist. "Remember," he murmured against her ear, "you're madly in love with me. Try to look the part." The words sent an unwanted shiver down her spine. This close, she could smell his cologne mixed with something uniquely him, could feel the warmth of his body through the expensive fabric of his tuxedo. For just a moment she forgot this was all pretense. "Thomas, darling." The voice cut through the elegant chatter like a blade wrapped in silk. Juliet turned to see Isabella Ashworth approaching, and the photos hadn't done her justice. She was stunning in an emerald green gown that flowed like liquid silk, diamonds glittering at her throat and wrists. Her red hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, and her green eyes held the kind of timeless beauty that made other women feel invisible. "Isabella." Thomas's voice was perfectly controlled, though Juliet felt the tension radiating from his body. "You look radiant." "Marriage agrees with you." Isabella's laugh was like crystal wind chimes. "You always were a charmer. And this must be your—" She paused, her gaze raking over Juliet with barely concealed disdain. "Friend, girlfriend," Thomas corrected, his arm tightening around Juliet's waist. "Juliet Summers, meet Isabella Ashworth. Isabella, this is Juliet." The introduction hung in the air like a challenge. Isabella's smile was sharp enough to cut glass as she extended a perfectly manicured hand. "How lovely to meet you, Juliet. And what is it you do?" The question was innocent enough, but Juliet heard the venom underneath. This was a test, and failure would expose her as the fraud she was. "I'm a teacher," Juliet said, falling back on the cover story they'd rehearsed. "Elementary education. I work with underprivileged children. How noble." Isabella's green eyes glittered with malicious amusement. Thomas has always had such a soft spot for charity cases. The insult hit like a physical blow, but before Juliet could respond, a distinguished older man appeared at Isabella's side. Richard Ashworth III was everything his photos had promised, classically handsome, with silver threading his temples, wearing his wealth like a comfortable old coat rather than armor. "Thomas, good to see you." Richard extended his hand with genuine warmth. Isabella has told me so much about you. You must be Juliet. I'm Richard. The kindness in his voice made Juliet's chest tighten with unexpected guilt. This man had no idea he was standing in the middle of Thomas's twisted game, that his fiancé's ex-lover was planning to steal her back using Juliet as bait. Congratulations on your engagement, Thomas said, shaking Richard's hand with perfect civility. Though I have to admit I'm surprised Isabella settled down so quickly after our arrangement ended. The word arrangement hung in the air like poison gas. Isabella's perfect composure cracked for just a moment, and Juliet saw something raw flash across her face. Hurt, anger, maybe even regret. Some of us believe in love, Thomas, Isabella said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Not everything is a business transaction. Of course not, Thomas replied with silky smoothness. Some things are investments, long-term strategies. Patience always pays off in the end. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Juliet felt sick as she realized she was watching Thomas plant seeds of doubt in Isabella's mind. Using their fake relationship as psychological warfare? If you'll excuse us, Richard said, his arm sliding protectively around Isabella's waist. We should greet our other guests. Enjoy the party. As they moved away, Juliet caught Isabella glancing back over her shoulder, her green eyes locked on Thomas with an expression that made Juliet's stomach clench. Longing, regret, something more dangerous than either. Well done, Thomas murmured against her ear. You played that perfectly. I feel sick, Juliet whispered back, her hand gripping his arm for support. Get used to it. We're just getting started. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of introductions and small talk. Thomas paraded her around the ballroom like a prized acquisition. Playing the role of devoted boyfriend with Oscar-worthy precision, he laughed at her nervous jokes, whispered sweet nothings that sounded genuine enough to fool everyone, including, disturbingly, herself. But Juliet noticed everything. The way Isabella's eyes followed them across the room. How Richard's smile became more forced each time he caught his fiancée watching Thomas. The whispered conversations that stopped when they approached. When they finally returned to the penthouse suite, Juliet's feet were killing her from the designer heels, and her face hurt from smiling. She kicked off the shoes and sank onto the plush sofa, feeling like she'd just survived a battle. You did well tonight, Thomas said, loosening his bow tie. Isabella was definitely affected by seeing us together. She still loves you, Juliet said quietly. I could see it in her eyes. Love Thomas's laugh was bitter. She loves the idea of me, the challenge, the danger. Richard is safe, predictable, everything she thought she wanted, until she saw what she gave up. And what if she doesn't come back? What if she chooses him? Thomas's expression darkened. She will. Women like Isabella always want what they can't have, and right now she thinks she can't have me. As Juliet prepared for bed in the suite's marble bathroom, she caught sight of herself in the mirror. The woman staring back was a stranger, polished, elegant, beautiful in a way that felt foreign. For 6 months, this would be her life. Playing pretend in a world where she didn't belong, helping a man win back the woman who'd been smart enough to walk away from him. She thought of Danny, probably asleep in their tiny apartment, dreaming of the surgery that would give him his life back. This was for him, she reminded herself. No matter how twisted the game, no matter how much it cost her dignity, she would play her part. But as she lay in the king-sized bed, surrounded by luxury she'd never dreamed of, Juliet couldn't shake the feeling that she was drowning in Thomas Blackwell's world. And the most dangerous part was that she was starting to forget it was all an act. 3 weeks into their arrangement, Juliet had settled into a routine that felt increasingly surreal. Our days were spent in Thomas's world charity luncheons, gallery openings, exclusive restaurants, where meals cost more than she used to make in a week. She'd become skilled at playing the part of the devoted girlfriend. Learned to read his moods and respond accordingly. Mastered the art of looking adoringly at him while cameras flashed. But the evenings were the hardest. When they returned to his penthouse apartment on the waterfront, the performance didn't end. Thomas insisted on maintaining the illusion even in private, claiming that household staff and security personnel were potential sources of gossip. So they shared meals, watched movies together, and kept up the charade of being a couple madly in love. "You're getting better at this," Thomas said one evening, as they sat on his terrace overlooking Elliott Bay. The Seattle skyline glittered in the distance. The October air carried the scent of salt and rain. At the Morrison Foundation Gala, "Tonight, even I almost believed you were in love with me." Juliet curled deeper into the cashmere throw draped over her shoulders. "Maybe I'm just a better actress than you give me credit for. Maybe." His blue eyes studied her with that calculating intensity she'd grown to recognize. "Or maybe you're starting to forget this is all pretend." The accusation hung in the air between them. Juliet felt heat rise in her cheeks because there was truth in his words that terrified her. Somewhere in the past 3 weeks, the lines had begun to blur. When Thomas smiled at her with genuine warmth, when he listened to her stories about Danny with what seemed like real interest, when he touched her hand or waist or cheek with unexpected tenderness, she found herself responding in ways that had nothing to do with their contract. "Don't flatter yourself," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I'm here for Danny, nothing more." "Good." Thomas's smile was sharp. "Because Isabella took the bait tonight. She asked 3 different people about you. Wanted to know how we met, how long we've been together." Richard noticed, of course. They had quite the heated discussion in the coat check. Juliet's stomach twisted. "You were watching them?" "I'm always watching, Juliet. That's how you win." It's pulled out. His phone showed her a text message from Isabella sent 20 minutes ago. "She wants to have lunch tomorrow. Just the 2 of us." The message was brief but loaded with meaning. "Thomas, I think we need to talk. Are you free for lunch tomorrow? There are things I need to say." "She's going to tell you she made a mistake," Juliet said quietly. "That she wants you back." "Probably." Thomas slipped the phone back into his pocket. "The question is, what will you do when she does?" "What do you mean?" "Our contract stipulates 6 months, but if Isabella comes back sooner, there's no reason to continue the charade. You'll have served your purpose." The casual dismissal stung more than it should have, so you'd just end it. "Send me back to my old life like nothing happened?" That was always the plan. Thomas's voice was matter-of-fact. "You get your money, Danny gets his surgery, and I get the woman I actually want. Everyone wins." Juliet stood abruptly, the throw falling from her shoulders. "I need some air. You're on a terrace. There's plenty of air. I need to be alone." She walked to the far end of the terrace, gripping the railing as she stared out at the dark water. The city lights blurred as tears gathered in her eyes. How had she been so stupid? Somewhere in the past 3 weeks, she'd begun to believe that maybe, just maybe, Thomas was starting to see her as more than a means to an end. The way he looked at her sometimes, the gentleness in his touch, the moments when his mask slipped, and she glimpsed something vulnerable underneath it, it all felt real. But it was just another performance, she realized. Thomas Blackwell was a master manipulator, and she'd been played by the best. Juliet. His voice was closer than expected. She turned to find him standing just behind her, his expression unreadable. In the dim light, "I'm fine," she said, quickly wiping her eyes. "No, you're not." He moved closer, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "You're crying. I'm just tired. It's been a long day. It's more than that." His thumb brushed away a tear she'd missed. "You're falling for me." The words hung between them like an accusation. Juliet wanted to deny it, to laugh it off, to protect what little pride she had left. But standing there in the moonlight, with Thomas's hand warm against her face and his eyes searching hers, she couldn't find the strength to lie. "Yes," she whispered. "God help me, yes." For a moment, something flickered across his face, surprise. Maybe even something that looked like regret. But then his mask slipped back into place, and he stepped away from her. "That's unfortunate," he said, his voice returning to its usual coldness. "For both of us." "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Would it really be so? Terrible if someone actually loved you for who you are instead of what you can give them. "You don't love me, Juliet. You love the idea of me, the fantasy we've created together. The real Thomas Blackwell is exactly what Isabella said, emotionally unavailable, and incapable of genuine love. I don't believe that? Then you're a fool. His words cut like a blade. I'm using you to win back another woman. I've manipulated you, bought you, turned you into someone you're not, and you think that's love? I think you're scared, Juliet said, finding her courage. I think you've never had someone see past the money and the power to the man underneath, and it terrifies you. Thomas's laugh was harsh. It's the man underneath. There's no man underneath, Juliet. There's just more of the same ambition, calculation, the need to win at any cost. I warned you not to forget this was business. And what happens when Isabella realizes the same thing? When she sees that you haven't changed at all, that you're still the same man who treated her like a possession, she won't realize it, Thomas said with cold certainty. Because I'll give her exactly what she wants, the illusion of transformation. The fairy tale of love conquering all. And she'll believe it because she wants to believe it, just like you wanted me to believe it. The question hung in the air unanswered. Thomas turned away from her, his hands gripping the railing as he stared out at the water. Go to bed, Juliet. Tomorrow we continue the performance until Isabella makes her choice. And then this will all be over. Juliet walked back into the penthouse, her heart breaking with each step. She'd been such a fool to think that 3 weeks of playing pretend could change a man like Thomas Blackwell. He'd warned her from the beginning that this was just business, that any genuine feelings would only complicate things. But as she lay in the guest bedroom that had become her temporary home, Juliet couldn't shake the feeling that she'd seen something real in his eyes tonight. Just for a moment, when his guard was down, she'd glimpsed the man he could be if he'd let himself. The question was whether that man was worth fighting for, or if she should protect her heart and count the days until her contract was fulfilled. Down the hall, Thomas stood at his bedroom window, still staring out at the city lights. Isabella's text message glowed on his phone screen. The words that should have filled him with triumph instead, leaving him feeling hollow. 3 weeks ago, Juliet Summers had been nothing more than a means to an end. Now, watching her walk away from him with tears in her eyes, he felt something crack inside his chest. Something that felt dangerously like regret. He'd spent his entire adult life building walls around his heart, protecting himself from the vulnerability that love demanded. Isabella had been safe because she'd never really known him, had never looked past the surface to see the darkness underneath, but Juliet saw everything: his cruelty, his manipulation, his desperate need to control everything around Hyman, somehow still found something worth loving. It was exactly what he'd feared would happen, and exactly what he'd always secretly hoped for. But Thomas Blackwell had never learned how to want something without destroying it. And as he prepared to meet Isabella tomorrow, he knew that saving himself meant sacrificing the only woman who'd ever truly seen him. The game was almost over. He should have been celebrating his victory. Instead, he'd never felt more like he was about to lose everything that mattered. The lunch meeting with Isabella was scheduled for 1 o'clock at La Bernardine, an exclusive restaurant where privacy was guaranteed and secrets were traded over wine that cost more than most people's monthly salaries. Thomas arrived early, choosing a corner table that offered a clear view of the entrance. He'd barely touched his water when Isabella swept in. Stunning as always in a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than most people's cars. Thomas. She slid into the seat across from him, her emerald eyes bright with an emotion he couldn't quite read. Thank you for meeting me. Of course, you said you had things to discuss. Isabella's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her wine glass. I've been thinking about us, about what we had, what I threw away. Have you? Thomas kept his voice neutral, though his pulse quickened. This was the moment he'd been working toward for months. Seeing you with her, with Juliet, made me realize something. Isabella's voice cracked slightly.
Yeah, I made a mistake, Thomas. The biggest mistake of my life.
Isabella, let me finish. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. I thought I wanted safe, predictable. I thought I wanted someone who would never challenge me, never push me to be more than I was. But watching you with her, seeing how you look at her, how gentle you are, I realized that's what I threw away. Thomas felt a strange twist in his chest. What exactly are you saying? I'm saying I was wrong about you, about us. I see the way you've changed, the way you love her, And I know now that you were capable of that kind of love all along. I was just too blind, too scared to see it. The irony was bitter. Isabella was falling for the very lie he'd constructed, seeing transformation where there was only performance. She believed he'd found redemption in Juliet's love, when the truth was far more complicated. I'm getting married in 2 weeks, Isabella continued, her voice barely above a whisper. But I can't go through with it, Thomas. Not when I know what I'm giving up. Not when I know you're the only man I've ever truly loved. Isabella, you don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. She reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. End it with her, Thomas. I know it will hurt, but she's young. She'll recover. We belong together. We always have. Thomas stared down at their joined hands, feeling the weight of victory and the unexpected burden of shame. This was what he'd wanted, what he'd orchestrated. So carefully, Isabella was offering him everything he'd claimed to desire. So why did it feel like ash in his mouth? Let's need time to think, he said finally. Of course, Isabella's smile was radiant. But don't take too long. I'll call off the wedding as soon as you say the word. After she left, Thomas sat alone at the table, staring at his untouched meal. He'd won. After months of careful manipulation, Isabella was ready to abandon her fiancé and come back to him. He should have been celebrating. Instead, he found himself thinking about Juliet, about the way she'd looked at him last night, tears in her eyes as she'd admitted she was falling for him, about the way she'd challenged him, seen through his defenses, made him want to be better than he was. His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. Miss Summers called. Her brother's surgery is scheduled for tomorrow morning. She wanted to thank you for arranging the pre-op consultation. Thomas closed his eyes, remembering the day he'd first met Juliet. He'd seen her as nothing more than a tool, a means to an end. But somewhere in the past month, she'd become something more. She'd become the mirror that showed him exactly what kind of man he really was, and he didn't like what he saw. When Thomas returned to the penthouse that evening, he found Juliet on the terrace talking on her phone. Her voice was animated, happy in a way he hadn't heard in days. I can't believe it's really happening, Danny, she was saying. Tomorrow morning, and then you'll be walking again. I know, it's going to be a long recovery, but we'll get through it together. She turned when she heard his footsteps, and the joy on her face made something twist painfully in his chest. How did it go? She asked after ending the call. As expected, Thomas poured himself a scotch, his hands not quite steady. She wants me back. Juliet's face fell, but she quickly composed herself. That's what you wanted, isn't it? Yes. The word felt like a lie, but he forced it out anyway. Our arrangement is over, Juliet. You've served your purpose. I see. Her voice was carefully neutral. And what happens now? Now you go back to your life. The money will be in your account. By tomorrow morning, Danny's surgery is fully covered, and you'll have enough left over to do whatever you want. What I want? Juliet's laugh was bitter. What I want is to matter to someone. What I want is to be more than a transaction, more than a means to an end. But I suppose that's not something money can buy. Juliet, no? It's fine. She held up a hand, stopping him. I knew what this was from the beginning. I just forgot myself for a while. I'll be out of your hair by tomorrow. She started to walk past him, but Thomas caught her arm. Wait, what? She turned back to face him, and Thomas saw the unshed tears she was fighting to contain. You two know that you did matter. More than you realized, did I? Her voice was barely a whisper. Or was that just another performance? Thomas opened his mouth to lie, to give her the clean break she deserved, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he found himself stepping closer, his hand coming up to cup her face. You terrify me. He said quietly, Do you know that? You see straight through every defense I've built, every wall I've constructed. Make me want to be someone I'm not sure I can be. Thomas, I've spent my entire life believing that love was weakness, that caring about someone gave them power over you. Butu make me want to be worthy of the way you look at me. And why are you choosing her? Question hung between them like a bridge he was afraid to cross. Thomas stared into Juliet's eyes, seeing everything he'd never known he wanted, reflected back at him. Safety. Acceptance. The kind of love that didn't demand perfection, but offered grace instead. Because I'm a coward, he said finally. Because Isabella is easy. She doesn't challenge me, doesn't ask me to be better. She loves the idea of me, not the reality. That's safer than risking everything on something real. Something real. Like what we have. What we have is a contract, Juliet. Business arrangement. Is it? She stepped closer. Close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her brown eyes. Because when you hold me, when you look at me like you're looking, at me right now, it doesn't feel like business. It feels like coming home. Thomas felt his carefully constructed world tilting on its axis. Every instinct screamed at him to push her away, to protect himself from the vulnerability she represented. But as he looked into her face, saw the love, and hope and terrifying trust she offered so freely, he felt something crack inside his chest. "I can't," he whispered. "I don't know how to love someone without destroying them." "Then learn," Juliet said simply. "Stop running from the best thing that's ever happened to you and learn." For a moment, Thomas allowed himself to imagine it. A life where he didn't have to perform, where he could be himself, flawed and damaged and trying to be better. A life where love wasn't a weapon, but a gift freely given. But the fear was too strong, the walls too high. He stepped back, his hand falling from her face. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it more than he'd ever meant anything in his life. "I can't be what you need me to be." The light in Juliet's eyes dimmed, replaced by a resignation that broke something inside him. "Then I guess this really is goodbye." She walked away without another word, leaving Thomas alone on the terrace. With his victory and his shame, he'd gotten everything he'd claimed to want. So why did it feel like he'd just lost the only thing that mattered? The next morning, as Juliet packed her few belongings, she found a note on her pillow. In Thomas's precise handwriting, it read, "Thank you for showing me what I could have been. I hope someday I'll be brave enough to deserve it." She crumpled the note and threw it away, but not before memorizing every word.
Out.
Danny's surgery was a success. As Juliet sat in the recovery room, watching her brother sleep peacefully for the first time in months, she tried to feel grateful. She'd saved him, given him his life back. The money in her account would let her finish school, become the teacher she'd always dreamed of being. But all she could think about was Thomas, alone in his penthouse, choosing the safe lie over the terrifying truth. She'd given him her heart, and he'd handed it back with an apology and a check. Some victories, she realized, felt an awful lot like defeat. 3 days later, Thomas attended Isabella's wedding. She'd called off her engagement to Richard and insisted on marrying Thomas immediately, afraid he might change his mind. He stood at the altar in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, watching her walk down the aisle in a dress that cost more than most people's houses, and felt absolutely nothing. The cameras flashed, the crowd applauded, and Thomas Blackwell got everything he'd claimed to want. But as he kissed his new bride, all he could think about was a woman with kind eyes and a generous heart who'd offered him something infinitely more precious than victory. He'd chosen to be safe instead of sorry. The question was whether he'd spend the rest of his life regretting that choice. 6 months later, Thomas stood in the same corner office where he'd first met Juliet, staring out at Elliott Bay as rain streaked the windows. The Seattle skyline looked exactly the same, but everything else had changed. His marriage to Isabella had lasted exactly 3 months, long enough for both of them to realize they'd made a terrible mistake. The divorce had been swift and brutal, played out in the tabloids with the kind of vicious detail that made Thomas grateful he'd never cared about public opinion. And Isabella had taken half his assets and moved to Monaco, where she was already being photographed with a Formula One driver who looked young enough to be her son. Thomas should have felt angry, betrayed, defeated. Instead, he felt nothing but a hollow ache that had taken up permanent residence in his chest. He'd won his game and lost everything that mattered. His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. "The quarterly education reports are ready for your review. The scholarship fund has awarded grants to 43 students this year." Scholarship fund. Thomas had established it quietly, without fanfare. 3 months ago, the Juliet Summers Educational Foundation provided full scholarships to students from low-income families who wanted to become teachers. It was a small gesture, pathetic really, but it was the only way he'd been able to keep a piece of her in. His life, he'd had reports compiled on her progress, of course. He knew she'd enrolled in a graduate program at the University of Washington, that she was studying to become a special education teacher. He knew Danny was walking again, that they'd moved to a small house in Ballard with a garden where Juliet grew flowers. He knew she'd been dating a fellow graduate student named Michael, a good man who probably deserved her in ways Thomas never would. The knowledge was torture, but he couldn't stop himself from needing to know she was happy. A knock at his door interrupted his brooding. "Come in." His assistant entered, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Mr. Blackwell, there's someone here to see you. She says she has an appointment, but I don't have anything on your calendar." "Who is it, Juliet Summers, sir?" Thomas felt his heart stop. "What? She's in the lobby. Should I send her up?" Thomas's mouth went dry. For 6 months, he'd imagined this moment, what he would say, how he would explain, whether he'd have the courage to tell her the truth. But now that it was here, he felt like a drowning man. "Send her up," he said finally. The minutes stretched like hours as he waited. Thomas found himself pacing, running his hands through his hair, checking his appearance in the mirror like a nervous teenager. When the elevator doors opened and Juliet stepped out, his breath caught in his throat. She looked different. She was older, more confident, wearing a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes. Her hair was shorter, framing her face in a way that made her look sophisticated and professional. But it was her expression that struck him most calm, composed, with none of the vulnerability he remembered. "Hello, Thomas? Juliet?" Her name felt rusty on his tongue. You look beautiful. Thank you." She walked into his office with easy confidence, not like the frightened girl who'd sat in that chair 6 months ago. "I hope you don't mind me coming here? I wanted to thank you for the scholarship fund. How did you—" "I'm not stupid, Thomas. The Juliet Summers Educational Foundation." "You weren't exactly subtle." She smiled, and it was warm but distant. "It's a wonderful thing you've done. Those students will have opportunities they never would have had otherwise. It's nothing, it's everything to them." She moved to the window, looking out at the same view that had captivated her all those months ago. "I'm graduating next month. I wanted you to know that I'm going to be teaching at Roosevelt Elementary, special education, working with kids who have disabilities. Like Danny, that's wonderful. I'm happy for you. Are you?" She turned back to him, and Thomas saw something in her eyes he couldn't quite read. "Are you happy, Thomas?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Thomas wanted to lie, to tell her he was living his best life, that winning Isabella back had been everything he'd hoped for. Standing there looking at Juliet, seeing the woman she'd become, he couldn't find the words. "No," he said quietly, "I'm not. I heard about the divorce." "I'm sorry, are you?" Juliet considered this. "I'm sorry you're hurting. I'm not sorry she left. You weren't right for each other, and you think you know who I'm right for. I know who you could have been right for if you'd been brave enough to try." The words hit him like a physical blow. Thomas sank into his chair, feeling older than his 33 years. "I was a coward." "Yes, you were." Juliet's voice was matter-of-fact, without accusation. "You chose fear over love, safety over happiness, and you broke both our hearts in the process. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything now, but I'm sorry. It means something." Juliet moved closer, perching on the edge of his desk the way she used to do when they were playing their game. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Thomas looked up at her, hope and fear warring in his chest. "What do you mean? Are you going to spend the rest of your life regretting what you threw away, or are you going to fight for it?" "Juliet, I hurt you. I used you. Don't deserve your right. You don't deserve it." Her voice was gentle but firm. "But love isn't about deserving. It's about choosing to be vulnerable, to risk everything for the chance of something real. The question is whether you're ready to make that choice." Thomas stared at her, this incredible woman who'd somehow found it in her heart to forgive him. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be in love without trying to control it." "Then learn." She reached out, taking his hand in hers. "Stop trying to manage love like a business deal and just feel it. Trust it. Trust me. What about Michael?" Juliet's smile was sad. "Michael is a good man. He deserves someone who can love him with her whole heart. My heart, well, It's been unavailable for the past 6 months. Why? Thomas's voice cracked. Why would you give me another chance after everything I did? Because I saw who you could be when you weren't trying to be anyone else. Because I believe in the man you showed me on that terrace, the one who was brave enough to admit he was scared. She squeezed his hand. And because I love you, Thomas. Not the billionaire, not the CEO, not the man you think you have to be. I love you. Thomas felt tears prick his eyes. He'd spent his entire life building walls, protecting himself from exactly this kind of vulnerability. But looking at Juliet, seeing the love and hope and impossible faith in her eyes, he felt those walls crumbling. I love you too, he whispered. I've loved you since the moment you walked into this office, and I've been too scared to admit it. Then don't be scared anymore. Juliet leaned forward, her forehead touching his. Be brave. Be the man I know you can be. Thomas pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world, which he realized she was. I don't know if I can be what you need. You don't have to be perfect, Juliet said against his neck. You just have to be willing to try. I'm willing, Thomas said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. I'm ready to try. 6 months later, Thomas stood in a small garden in Ballard, watching Juliet walk toward him in a simple white dress that made her look like an angel. Danny was there, walking without assistance, beaming with pride as he prepared to give his sister away. The guest list was small, just family and close friends. No cameras or society reporters. It was perfect. You sure about this? Danny asked Thomas as Juliet approached. She's pretty amazing. If you hurt her again, I'll have to kill you. I'm sure, Thomas said, never taking his eyes off Juliet. I promise you I'll spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of her. The ceremony was simple, heartfelt, nothing like the society. Wedding Thomas had endured 6 months earlier. When they exchanged vows, Thomas spoke from the heart, telling Juliet and everyone present that she'd saved him from a life of empty victories and hollow success, that she'd taught him the difference between winning and happiness. I promise to love you not because you're perfect, but because you're perfectly mine, he said, tears streaming down his face. I promise to be brave enough to deserve the gift of your love and to never stop fighting for us. As they kissed, sealing their promise to each other, Thomas felt something he'd never experienced before: complete, perfect peace. He'd finally stopped running from the best thing that had ever happened to him. The billionaire's gambit was over. For the first time in his life, Thomas Blackwell had truly won. The end.